Swiss Guards are the Swiss soldiers who have served as guards at foreign European courts since the late 15th century. In addition to small household and palace units, Swiss mercenary regiments have served as regular line troops in various armies, notably those of France, Spain and Naples. The Swiss were famous mercenaries for hundreds of years. Since Switzerland was a poor country, young men often sought their fortunes abroad. Swiss troops had a reputation for discipline and loyalty, and for employing revolutionary battle tactics such as the pike square. They were considered the most effective mercenaries of the 15th century, until their battle drill was improved upon by the German Landsknechte. At the Battle of Bicocca and the Battle of Marignano, the Landsknecht defeated the Swiss pikemen in French service. The earliest Swiss Guard unit to be established on a permanent basis was the 100 Swiss, which served at the French court from 1490 to 1817. This small force was complemented in 1567 by a Swiss Guards regiment. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, several other Swiss Guard units existed for periods in various European courts. The Papal Swiss Guard was founded in 1506 and is the only extant Swiss Guard. It is one of the oldest military units in the world. Currently, the name Swiss Guard generally refers to the Pontifical Swiss Guard of the Holy See stationed at the Vatican in Rome. The Papal Swiss Guard has a bodyguard-like role. Recruits to the Guards must be Catholic, single males with Swiss citizenship who have completed basic training with the Swiss military and can obtain certificates of good conduct. Recruits must have a professional degree or high school diploma and must be between 19 and 30 years of age and at least 174 centimeters tall. The official dress uniform is of blue, red, orange and yellow with a distinctly Renaissance appearance. After the 13th of May 1981 assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II by gunman Mehmet Ali Agca, a much stronger emphasis has been placed on the Guard's non-ceremonial roles, and has seen enhanced training in unarmed combat and small arms. The Swiss Guard uses traditional weapons, such as a sword and a halberd, as well as modern weapons such as the SIG P220 and Glock 19 pistols, the Steyr TMP machine pistol and submachine guns like the Heckler and Koch MP5A3. In France, there were two different corps of Swiss mercenaries performing guard duties for the kings of France. The 100 Swiss, serving within the palace as essentially bodyguards and ceremonial troops, and the Swiss Guards, guarding the entrances and outer perimeter. In addition, the Gardes Suisses served in the field as a fighting regiment in times of war. 100 Swiss. The 100 Swiss were created in 1480 when Louis XI retained a Swiss company for his personal guard. By 1496 they comprised 100 guardsmen plus about 27 officers and sergeants. Their main role was the protection of the king within the palace as the Garde du Dédans du Louvre, but in the earlier part of their history they accompanied the king to war. In the Battle of Pavia, the 100 Swiss of King Francis I were slain before Francis was captured by the Spanish. The 100 Swiss shared the indoor guard with the king's bodyguards, who were Frenchmen. The 100 Swiss were armed with halberds, the blade of which carried the royal arms in gold, as well as gold-hilted swords. Their ceremonial dresses worn until 1789 comprised an elaborate 16th-century Swiss costume covered with braiding and livery lace. A less ornate dark blue and red uniform with bearskin headdress was worn for ordinary duties. The St. Suisses Company was disbanded after Louis XVI left Versailles in October 1789. It was however refounded on 15 July 1814 with an establishment of 136 guardsmen and 8 officers. The 100 Swiss accompanied Louis XVIII into exile in Belgium the following year and returned with him to Paris following Waterloo. The unit then resumed its traditional role of palace guards at the Tuileries, but in 1817 it was replaced by a new guard company drawn from the French regiments of the Royal Guard. Swiss Guards. King Francis I of France used some 120,000 Swiss mercenaries in his wars. In 1616, King Louis XIII gave a regiment of Swiss infantry the name of Gardes Suisses. The new regiment had the primary role of protecting the doors, gates and outer perimeters of the various royal palaces. In its early years this unit was officially a regiment of the line, but it was generally regarded as part of the king's military household. During the 17th and 18th centuries the Swiss Guards maintained a reputation for discipline and steadiness in both peacetime service and foreign campaigning. Their officers were all Swiss and their rate of pay substantially higher than that of the regular French soldiers. Internal discipline was maintained according to Swiss codes which were significantly harsher than those of the regular French army. By the end of the 17th century the Swiss Guards were formally part of the Maison Militaire du Roi. As such they were brigaded with the regiment of French Guards, with whom they shared the outer guard, and were in peacetime stationed in barracks on the outskirts of Paris. Like the 11 Swiss regiments of line infantry in French service, the Gardes Suisses wore red coats. The line regiments had black, yellow or light blue facings, but the Swiss Guards were distinguished by dark blue lapels and cuffs edged in white embroidery. Only the Grenadier Company wore bearskins while the other companies wore the standard tricorn headdress of the French infantry. The Guards were recruited from all the Swiss cantons. The nominal establishment was 1,600 men, though actual numbers normally seem to have been below this. During the Revolution, the most famous episode in the history of the Swiss Guards was their defense of the Tuileries Palace in central Paris during the French Revolution. Of the 900 Swiss Guards defending the palace on 10 August 1792, about 600 were killed during the fighting or massacred after surrender. One group of 60 Swiss were taken as prisoners to the Paris City Hall before being killed by the crowd there. An estimated 160 more died in prison of their wounds, or were killed during the September massacres that followed. Apart from less than 100 Swiss who escaped from the Tuileries, some hidden by sympathetic Parisians, the only survivors of the regiment were a 300-strong detachment that had been sent to Normandy to escort grain convoys a few days before 10 August. The Swiss officers were mostly amongst those massacred. Although Major Karl Joseph von Bachmann in command at the Tuileries was formally tried and guillotined in September, still wearing his red uniform coat. Two Swiss officers, the captains Henry de Salis and Joseph Zimmermann, did however survive and went on to reach senior rank under Napoleon and the Restoration. There appears to be no truth in the charge that Louis XVI caused the defeat and destruction of the Guards by ordering them to lay down their arms, when they could still have held the Tuileries. Rather, the Swiss ran low on ammunition and were overwhelmed by superior numbers when fighting broke out spontaneously after the royal family had been escorted from the palace to take refuge with the National Assembly of France. A note has survived written by the king ordering the Swiss to retire from the palace and return to their barracks, but this was only acted on after their position had become untenable. The regimental standards had been secretly buried by the adjutant shortly before the regiment was summoned to the Tuileries on the night of 8/9 August. Indicating that the likely end was foreseen. They were discovered by a gardener and ceremoniously burned by the new Republican authorities. The barracks of the Guard at Courbevoie were stormed by the local National Guard, and the few Swiss still on duty there also killed. The heroic but futile stand of the Swiss is commemorated by Bertel Thorvaldsen's Lion Monument in Lucerne, dedicated in 1821, which shows a dying lion collapsed upon broken symbols of the French monarchy. An inscription on the monument lists the 26 Swiss officers who died on 10 August and 2–3 September 1792, and records that approximately 760 Swiss guardsmen were killed on those days. Following the Restoration, the French Revolution abolished mercenary troops in its citizen army, but Napoleon I and the Restoration monarchy both made use of Swiss troops. 4 Swiss infantry regiments were employed by Napoleon, serving in both Spain and Russia. 2 of the 8 infantry regiments included in the Garde Royale from 1815 to 1830 were Swiss and can be regarded as successors of the Old Guards. Suisses. When the Tuileries was stormed again, in the July Revolution, the Swiss regiments, fearful of another massacre, were withdrawn or melted into the crowd. They were not used again. In 1831, disbanded veterans of the Swiss regiments and another foreign unit, the Hohenlohe Regiment, were recruited into the newly raised French Foreign Legion for service in Algeria. In other European states, Swiss Guard units similar to those of France were in existence at several other royal courts at the dates indicated below. From 1579 on, a Swiss Guard served the House of Savoy, rulers of Savoy and later the Kingdom of Sardinia. The Guard was dissolved in 1798. From 1696 to 1713, a Swiss Guard served at the court of Frederick I of Prussia. A Swiss Guard also existed in the Grand Duchy of Tuscany during the 18th century. A Cent Suisse unit was in existence from 1730 until 1757, and again from 1763 to 1814 in the Kingdom of Saxony. A similar unit existed from 1734 until 1789 in the Kingdom of Naples. Swiss line infantry regiments continued to serve in the Neapolitan army until the 1860s. From 1748 until 1796, a company of Swiss served as a personal guard for the Stadtholder of the Dutch Republic. Besides the Dutch Guard regiment, there was also a Swiss Guard regiment. William I, the King of the Netherlands, incorporated 4 regiments of Swiss infantry in the new Dutch army between 1814 and 1829, of which the 4th served as Guard infantry, until the Swiss regiments were disbanded and new official Guard regiments of Grenadiers and Jaegers were raised. For a brief time during the reign of Empress Maria Theresa, approximately 250 to 450 soldiers from Switzerland guarded the Hofburg, the Winter Palace in Vienna. They replaced previous military units that had performed that duty, and were later replaced by others. The oldest courtyard of the palace is still called the Swiss Court, in acknowledgement of their 20-year presence. In Portugal, a Swiss regiment was raised by the Count of Lippe on 12 June 1762. It comprised 2 battalions of 809 men each, consisting of 4 companies of Swiss troops plus 4 non-Swiss companies, for a total of 1618 men. Enlistment was for 6 years, and the soldiers could not be required to serve at sea. Half the soldiers had to be Swiss, while the other half could be made up of Germans and Hungarians. The Portuguese government paid the sum of 2,960,000 reis to raise, arm and equip these 2 battalions. Colonels paid for their offices. Each soldier earned 4,537 reis per month plus a daily ration of bread. On the 22nd of June 1763, Colonel Gabriel Thorman was sentenced to imprisonment until he returned funds and property embezzled from his regiment, while Colonel Marcus Sauscher was sentenced to death for desertion. The regiment was disbanded on 17 September 1763 by a decree that also ordered the raising of a new Swiss regiment, which met a similar fate to its predecessor. Its 8 companies comprised 90 soldiers each, plus the superior and inferior officers. It was ordered dissolved in 1765, and its commander, Colonel Luis Enrique Graveson, condemned by a council of war to death by hanging. This sentence was commuted to a firing squad, and the execution was carried out on 15 November 1765, in Campo de Urique, on 2 January 1766. Swiss constitutional prohibition. The Swiss constitution, as amended in 1874, forbade all military capitulations and recruitment of Swiss by foreign powers, although volunteering in foreign armies continued until prohibited outright, in 1927. The Papal Swiss Guard remains an exception to this prohibition, reflecting the unique political status of the Vatican and the bodyguard-like role of the unit.